Hi everybody, my name is Michael Zornick and welcome to the Code Show. This is episode 3, I believe, of our conference building application. In our last episode, we actually created our fresh Xcode project called Red Arrow. We talked a little bit about GitHub and gitignore, and we put that up online in the repo called Red Arrow. Today we're actually going to get started with our Xcode project. So one of the first things I actually want to do before we get started with that is just talk a little bit about folders and stuff. So we have our conference app.bmpr, which is the balsamic file format. I kind of like if I've got visuals or documentation, I like to keep them in the repo that I'm building. So one of the first things I'm going to do is actually close Balsamic here, and I'm just going to create a new folder called documentation. And so we're going to take our file there, and we're going to put it in. Now, anytime you're adding kind of an exotic file format, I think it's just kind of nice and professional to kind of include a more generic version of it. So for us, that's going to be as simple as just creating a PNG of our file here. So we'll save that in the same folder. And I'll make this big just because we're going to look at it a little bit later. But we also now have our PNG file. And that's kind of helpful for people who don't have Balsamic installed. All right, so that in itself is an isolated edition. So I'm just going to stage both the Balsamic file and the preview. And I'm just going to say adding design sketch to documentation. And we'll hit commit, and we'll commit and push that up to origin master. All right. So I said we'd actually get into Xcode today, and I did not lie. So we're going to launch Xcode. And so one of the first things I guess I want to talk a little bit about is the initial view controller. So we're going to use storyboards. And as you can see, Xcode has created for us a view controller, subtly named a view controller. And I'm going to rename that. So, and right here, we're just going to take advantage of built-in refactor tools, which are kind of new. So this is going to be called, this is going to show the list of all of our sessions. And that's actually the terminology I think I would like to use. I'd like to think of the idea of like an event has many sessions, and sessions have different properties. So like a session has a title and a room assignment and speakers. So this thing, this view controller here is going to be our session list view controller. So that is what I will name it, session list view controller. And we can see this is going to edit both the file name of the Swift file, the class, and the view controller reference in the storyboard. The only other thing I'll do, and this isn't going to be needed right now, but often what I like to do is if I have a view controller in a storyboard and it's a custom class, I like to kind of put a storyboard ID, which is the same name as that custom class, because often you'll want to instantiate view controllers that are kind of not the like initial view controller or whatever. All right, so to get started, we're going to want a table view here. Now you have two choices to do this. One, you could use a view controller and put a table view inside it. Your other option would be to actually create and subclass a table view controller. And when you do that, you get a little bit of behavior for free. However, in my experiences, I tend to just build my own table view because eventually I find whenever I use table view, there'll become a period of time where I have to kind of take the table view out because when you use table view controller, table view is actually the root view controller. A root view controller is a view. And so if you want to kind of substitute like an add view in the bottom where you kind of want to adjust the table view's positioning, sometimes it can get a little difficult. So we're going to do it by hand, which is not all that hard. We're going to take our table view from the object browser and drag it in. And we're going to constrain it. And we're going to constrain it to not the margins. We're just going to constrain it to the for all edges. And then we're going to add a row. And for this row, we're just going to use basic. And because it's the basic type, I tend to use the word basic as its identifier for how we're going to get access to it later on. And this table view needs to have a data source and delegate, and so I will set that up to be the session list view controller itself. And now inside session list view controller, I'm going to clean up the comments, clean up the default methods that it tends to create. And so this is going to show table view stuff. So again, you have a couple of ways you can do this. One way some people like to do it is they'll create extensions, and they'll extend session list view controller to be a UITableView data source and kind of encapsulate their content there. The only problem, one of the problems I ran into with that is that you run into some visual access level problems. So like once you start create private things, the extensions can't see into the private stuff unless it's in the same file, and then you end up creating these file private. And I find file private just to be like just a really ugly word. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to actually keep them inline, but I do like to separate them with this these marks, and I'll show you what those look like in a second. So now that we've told the view controller that it's going to be a data source, now once we type in table, it'll actually give us a nice list of things, auto completions that we can use. And so you need two methods to do a table. You need number of rows and section, and for us, we'll just return 100, just get things going. And then you need to return the cell at index path. So cell for row at index path. Cool. Now to get this cell, we're going to ask the table view to dequeue a cell for us. Actually, let me do let cell equal. And we're going to dequeue cell. So they offer two, with identifier, and then the other one is with identifier for index path. The one for index path is actually much newer. And if you look at the return types, the one with just the cell returns an optional. The one with index path returns an explicit instance of cell. So keep that in mind as well. So we're going to use the word basic because that's what we set up in our storyboard. And then we're just going to pass the index path we have here. So we fixed our typo, was we hit call instead of cell. And then our cell, of course, has access to things like text label with text. And for now, I'm just going to put in the index path just so we see something unique. And we'll return our cell. We've got a failure. Text label is optional, so that may or may not be there. And this actually needs to be inside of a string. We'll hit build. All right, so that took a little bit longer to build. We'll cut that out. But we've run our application. We've got a nice little table view going with a whole lot of rows, and they're all nice and unique, which is great. A couple things to note. Of course, we don't see our navigation bar. We are not inside of a navigation controller yet, which is something we'll want to fix. And the next thing we'll also want to fix is, of course, we'll want to start to get some data that's a little bit closer to what we're looking towards. So I'm going to just close the simulator and hit stop. We'll let that stop running. I'm going to come into the storyboard, and first thing I'm going to do is just add our navigation controller. This is going to be relatively easy to do. Now, when you drag in a navigation controller, you'll see it brings in this root view controller. You can just highlight that and hit delete, and then I'll bring my navigation controller over. We need to do two things at this moment. One, we need to make the navigation controller the initial view controller for the storyboard, and we're going to do that by just dragging this arrow over there, and then we'll highlight our navigation controller, and we want to make this session list the root view controller, so we'll set up that relationship there. So now that we have that, we'll actually have a navigation bar at the top, and to customize that title, we'll highlight the navigation item, and we'll just put in the temporary word conference name, and that's a little bit closer to our design. Cool. So we're just going to leave that as is. We'll see how that runs in a second. The next thing we want to do is set up some models and kind of start to fake out some of our data. So I'm going to create, I'm actually going to create a new group, and we're going to call it models. And one of the interesting things with Xcode 9 is that when you create these groups, they will actually now be mirrored in the file system. So as you can see, we've got red arrow, which is our main project directory. And when I created the group models, it created the folder models. And so if I store my session.swift file in there, that's where it's going to live on the file system, as well as the hierarchy, this is something different from previous versions of Xcode. The other thing I want to note too is, of course, I'm adding this to the red arrow target, so that way it's compiled for our main app. If you ever want to create a folder that is not a mirrored kind of reference of the file system, what you do is you create a new group without folder, and then that way it's basically just a group to organize things here in the inspector or the navigator. It won't actually mirror the file system. So what I like to do is we're going to get started with our kind of model layer here, and I'm going to start with structures. I generally try to use structures in Swift when I can, and if we look back at our design, we can see events have a name or a title, they have a speaker, they have a room assignment, they also have a date and time. We're going to keep things simple to start off things, so we're just going to assign title, name, speaker, and then room. So we're going to say let title be a string, and we're going to do the speaker as singular for now. And we're even going to keep it really simple by just keeping it a string for now, too. Room, let's call it room. Location. Yeah, location sounds about right. And so we're going to create 3 lets. Because we are not doing anything fancy, Swift will create a constructor for us. So back in the session list view controller, what I'd like to do now is create a property which is going to hold our sessions. And so this is going to be an array of session, and it's going to start off, we're going to start off with an empty array, and we're going to keep it as a var so other people from outside, potentially could set it. And to populate it, what I like to do early on is just create some fake data. And the way I like to do this is I create, I create a private method, but I also like to group my private methods with those marks as well. So we got data, and you can see with all those marks, like in the pull down, they kind of get broken, up nice and easily. So we'll just do S1. All right. So we've created a couple of pieces of fake data. We're storing them inside of our sessions array. And now let's let our table view actually be powered off of the sessions array instead of the default 100 that we put in. So instead of 100, we're going to return the sessions.count. So the number of rows in session will represent the number of rows in the table view. And for the table itself, we're going to need some information about the session. So we're going to say let session equal sessions index path.row. And now that we've got the session that is the one-to-one relationship to the cell, we can use that inside of the title. So we'll just do session.title. All right, so let's play and run and see what our stuff looks like. All right, so our app is launched. We have success and failure. we've got some success in that we see the word conference name here in the navigation bar. Unfortunately, our table view is empty. And the reason it is because though we have created this load fake data method at the bottom, we actually never called it. So I'm actually going to install that in the view.load method, and I'll hit stop, and I'll hit play, and we'll try this once more. All right, cool. So now, in addition to the conference name navigation bar, we now see our 3 rows for Intro to Swift, Advanced Swift, and Auto Layout Tips. Sounds like a great conference. Cool. So that's all the time I have for today. Join me next time, and we'll continue to work on creating some custom cells to kind of better match our design. And I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.